Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain getting fat in a healthy way. This movie tells the story in a dystopian world where Earth's gravity has been weakened and anyone weighing less than 120 kilos flies off into space. The skinny man must live his whole life inside until a plump woman moves in next door and changes everything. Will their world return to the way it used to be? Let's find out in Getting Fat in a Healthy Way. Getting fat in a healthy way begins with a dream experienced by a fat father named Atanas. Atanas has a slim and beautiful wife and a thin son named Constantine. In his dream, Atanas was having a picnic in a vast meadow. He had fun family time with his wife and son and they looked happy. However, a moment later, his wife looked at a towel they had placed beside their picnic box with a panicked face. The towel began to fly high into the sky. Worse, when the towel floated, it turned out that the gravity on the earth suddenly stopped in an instant, which caused everything around Atanas to start floating into the sky, including his wife and son. Only Atanas was still standing on the ground and not floating. Luckily, he was able to grab Constantine's hand, whose body was already flying into the sky like a kite. Constantine can also grab his mother's hand and hold it very tightly even though his mother's body floats higher than him. Not long after, his mother's face looked sad as if she wanted to say goodbye. Then, she let go of her son's hand, flew higher and higher into the sky, and then disappeared. Seeing his wife let go of his son's hand, he pulled Constantine and hugged him tightly. Atanas, who saw his wife missing in the sky, still couldn't believe what had just happened. Not long after, he suddenly woke up from his dream gasping for air. The dream he had just had was a real event that happened to him 20 years ago. Exactly 20 years ago, there was a tragic accident on the American spacecraft. This has caused the Earth's gravity to break and the moon's shape to be partially cut off so that the moon doesn't look like a complete spherical circle. This damage is impossible to repair. As a result, planet Earth is experiencing a dystopia in which everyone who weighs less than 120 kilograms will float into space. The story turns to Constantine and his father, who live in a small flat in a rundown apartment block. Because of this dystopia, Constantine was forbidden by his father to leave the apartment. His father was worried that he would fly off into the sky and be lost if he got out. Therefore, he spent only in the apartment every day and never went out. Constantine only saw the world through his apartment window for most of his life. Atanas and Constantine are eating in the dining room. The dining table is attached to the wall and a bracket is installed so it doesn't float. Inside the apartment, we can also see the gravity controller being turned on to make the items in the apartment stay in place and not float to the roof. There is also a bookcase covered with wire so that the books don't fall out of the shelves if the gravity controller is turned off. They saw a news broadcast on TV at breakfast that reported on the 20th anniversary of the American spacecraft mission called New Land. The TV reporter reported that the warning for this American space mission would fall on a full moon and could possibly damage the eyes. When the TV reporter asked the viewers for a minute's silence, suddenly there was a booming sound. Not long after, while they were having breakfast, all the plates and food on the dining table began to fly to the roof. Constantine struggled with all his might not fly to the roof by holding tightly to the table, but his efforts were in vain because he also floated to the roof of the room in the end. Atanas was annoyed with the gravity control device in his house that often turned off. He then checked the device. He tells Constantine that he will restart his gravity device and asks Constantine to be prepared if he falls to the floor. Constantine closed his eyes and prepared to fall. The gravity control device turned on and one by one, the items floating on the roof began to fall. Atanas also covered his head so as not to be hit by these items. There was the sound of Constantine crying in pain as he hit his body and he fell to the floor. Atanas began to tidy up the scattered things and put his wife's photo back on the wall. Then he checked Constantine's condition and examined his son's body, who was in pain. After that, he weighed his body on the scales and saw that his body weight was 120 kilograms less. He is very worried that if his weight drops from 120 kilograms, he might float up without a gravity control device. After weighing his body, Atanas was getting ready to go to work. He then put the metal balls in his bag. After his father left for work, Constantine would spend all day alone in his apartment. He then took binoculars and began to spy on the people on the street in front of his house. A man in military uniform and tall stature stood on the side of the road. Because the man's body weight is more than 120 kilograms, he can walk as usual by stepping on the ground without fear of flying. Only the bag was floating in the air. Then the binoculars were turned elsewhere and he saw his father talking to two fat women who were on their morning walk with their dog soaring into the sky. The funny thing is, the dogs of the two fat women were tied with a leash and the leash was held tightly by them, so the dogs floated not too high above the heads of the two fat women. Just like his father, the two chubby ladies had no trouble walking outside due to their over 120 kilograms body weight. Then the binoculars were pointed at the balcony of the apartment next door. Constantine saw a woman throwing a musical instrument downstairs through her balcony. However, the musical instrument that was thrown back flew into the sky. The two fat women who had been talking to their father started gossiping about Constantine. They felt sorry that Constantine was not allowed to leave the apartment by his father. They continued to gossip that Constantine could actually come out strapped to his father if he wanted to leave the apartment. Suddenly their dog barked very loudly, so they stopped their gossiping. Of course, Constantine has to improvise all day only in the apartment so he doesn't feel bored. By looking at the pictures of the scenery that he posted on his walls, he then got the inspiration to conjure up his apartment space like on the beach. He put on a video cassette showing the scenery on the beach against the background sound of the ocean waves. After that, he opened the beach umbrella with green stripes and placed it in front of the TV. One by one he began to remove his clothes, including the pillow attached to his stomach. He put the pillow on his body so that when he flew to the roof of the house, he would be protected from impact. After removing his clothes and wearing only shorts, he lay down on a towel while facing the TV. Then, he put on sunglasses and smeared lotion on his body to make it look like sunbathing on the beach. Suddenly he heard a car honk outside his apartment. Then he was curious to see who honked the horn. He took his binoculars and peeked through the window. He saw a plump woman get off and walk out of her vehicle while looking up. When Constantine saw a plump woman through his binoculars, the woman was releasing her long hair that was standing straight up into the air while waving at him. Seeing this, Constantine immediately hid behind the window wall. He was embarrassed because he had never interacted with a woman in his entire life. Then, he started wearing his clothes again and didn't forget to tie a pillow around his body. After that, he wrote the word hello on a large piece of paper. He wanted to show the message he had just written to the window to be addressed to the plump woman. However, he suddenly thought twice and gave up. During his lunch break, his father came home briefly from work for lunch. Constantine then prepared lunch for his father. Atanas felt uncomfortable seeing Constantine wearing a woman's apron who belonged to none other than his mother. He asked his son to return the apron to the cupboard. After eating, his father went back to work. Seeing his father had left, Constantine went straight to his room to lie down while reading an adult magazine. Suddenly, when the magazine he was holding fell, then he took the magazine back and saw an article about how to get fat in a healthy way. He read the article and found information that a person can easily gain weight up to 120 kilograms by eating good food. After reading the article and without thinking, he immediately ordered many burgers. He weighed himself and looked happy because his weight had reached almost 60 kilograms. Suddenly his attention was distracted when he heard a honk outside his apartment. He quickly wrote his name on a large piece of paper. When the girl of his dreams got of her vehicle, he immediately showed the paper through his apartment window. The girl saw it and waved her hand at him. After the meeting, Constantine was excited to finish the rest of the burger he had ordered, even though he had difficulty swallowing the burgers because he was already feeling so full. He didn't give up and pushed the burgers into his stomach. Finally, he was able to finish all the burgers he ordered. However, after that, his body felt unwell. The scene then switched to Atanas, who was working in his office. Suddenly he received a phone call. It turned out that he got the news that his son was sick from food poisoning. He rushed home quickly. Arriving at the apartment, he saw his son was lying limp in his bed and medical personnel had helped him. The next day Constantine looked healthy and was able to get out of bed to find breakfast. Then he weighed himself again and was disappointed that his weight had dropped to around 50 kilograms. He then tied a pillow to his body and took a piece of paper to write a message addressed to the woman of his dreams. The woman was already outside the apartment and looked at Constantine's window. However, she did not see Constantine standing behind the window. Actually, Constantine really wanted to meet her in person, but he was frustrated because his body was so thin that he couldn't get out of the apartment. He then ties himself to the refrigerator and pulls the refrigerator out of the apartment door. Unfortunately, his father opened the apartment door after coming home from work when he tried to get out. His father caught him. Atanas then pushed the refrigerator and his son, who was stuck on top of the refrigerator because he was tied with a rope to return to the apartment. Because of this incident, Atanas removed all large and heavy objects from his apartment space to prevent Constantine from going out again. Constantine became annoyed because he could not express his love for the woman he loved. When his father entered Constantine's room a few days later, he saw his son lying in bed with a messy room full of things scattered on the floor. His father returned to his room to make a pair of shoes. Too tired, he then fell asleep in the chair. It wasn't long before he dreamed of being in the meadow like when he went on a picnic with his wife and son at the beginning of the film. However, in his dream, he was alone with Constantine in a standing position on the grass, and Constantine flew a little higher above his head while holding his hand. It didn't take long for Constantine to let go of his hand just like his wife did. So shocked, he immediately woke up from his dream. He saw a photo of his wife and other belongings that had floated to the roof because the gravity control fuse had blown again. But strangely, the shoes he had just made did not fly. He immediately grabbed the shoes, held them high, and then dropped them down. It turned out that the pair of shoes had fallen to the floor while the other items were still floating on the roof. He immediately turned on the gravity control device, and not long after, the items that had been floating on the roof fell on his head. The next day, Constantine came out of his room and had breakfast with his father. Unexpectedly, his father placed a pair of shoes on the table and explained that Constantine could wear them to go out of the house because he had installed a gravity control device. Constantine replied that the shoes were for women, not for men. His father then explained that the shoes were a unisex type that both men and women could wear. Curious, Constantine tried on the shoes and attached a backpack containing metal weights. After that, his father turned off the gravity controller in his apartment. As usual, if the gravity control device is off, the items in the room will immediately float to the roof. Surprisingly, Constantine, who usually floated along, could stand up straight like a normal person by setting his feet on the floor. Seeing that the experiment on a pair of shoes was successful, Atanas and Constantine looked happy. Constantine tried to walk out of the apartment wearing a pair of shoes and carrying a backpack filled with metal weights. His father watched his son through the window. He is seen starting to walk towards the apartment across. He then saw the woman he liked smiling while standing on the balcony of her apartment upstairs. Arriving at the ground floor of a plump woman's apartment, unexpectedly, he turned off the gravity control button on his shoe. He began to float upwards. He passed window after window of the apartment as he soared upwards. His father screamed and tried to warn Constantine not to do that. Not long after, he let go of his bag containing metal weights and removed the pillow attached to his body. He closed his eyes and continued to climb upstairs. However, he suddenly felt someone's hand gripping his shoulder and not letting him soar any higher while he was flying. Constantine smiled when he opened his eyes and he saw the woman he liked was also smiling at him. After witnessing this, Atanas winked at the photo of his wife, and the film ended with the radio floating in the sky. From the hovering radio, a radio announcer's voice introduced an American astronaut named Dusan Pratik who took part in a spaceship mission that caused dystopia on this Earth. The astronaut started his conversation by apologizing for what had happened on Earth because of the spaceship crash at that time. He also continued that the world may never fully recover from the dystopia that plagues the world today. The film ends.